Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a major development that's making headlines across Europe and beyond. Moscow's Kaliningrad land bridge, the crucial route connecting Russia to its Baltic exclave, is effectively gone. Hundreds of trains and trucks are reportedly stuck as Belarus and Lithuania shut down border crossings, cutting off the flow of goods and supplies. This isn't just a transport issue. It's a strategic shift that could reshape how Russia connects to one of its most important territories on the Baltic Sea. Kaliningrad is a small piece of Russian territory that doesn't actually touch the Russian mainland. It sits between Lithuania and Poland on the Baltic coast. For decades, Russia has relied on transit routes through Lithuania and Belarus to send supplies, everything from fuel and food to military equipment, by rail and road. But now, with border closures and increased security restrictions, that vital land corridor has come to a halt. The result is a pileup of freight, a logistical nightmare, and rising tensions between Russia, Belarus, Lithuania, and the wider European Union. The issue started when Lithuania decided to shut down its remaining border crossings with Belarus. Officials in Vilnius said the closures were for national security reasons, pointing to hybrid threats from Belarus, such as balloon launches carrying contraband and illegal surveillance equipment. That move immediately disrupted trade routes that pass from Belarus into Lithuania, routes that Russian freight trains and trucks used to reach Kaliningrad, even though Lithuania insists that official Kaliningrad it is still technically allowed under EU rules. The reality is that the process has slowed to a crawl, and hundreds of shipments are stranded. For Moscow, this is a serious problem. Kaliningrad isn't just another Russian region, it's a heavily militarized exclave that hosts Russia's Baltic fleet, missile systems, and radar installations. It's strategically positioned near NATO countries and plays a key role in Russia's defense posture. Losing the smooth flow of supplies by land means Moscow has to rely on slower and costlier alternatives, such as shipping goods by sea or airlifting critical materials. That not only raises costs, but also exposes these routes to possible monitoring or disruption by NATO forces in the Baltic Sea. Trains loaded with construction materials, machinery, food, and even fuel have been stopped in their tracks. Truck convoys are backed up for kilometers near border checkpoints that are either closed or heavily restricted. Russian logistics companies are struggling to reroute cargo through alternative paths, but the infrastructure and port capacity simply aren't there to handle the sudden change. Belarus, caught in the middle, is furious. President Alexander Lukashenko has blasted Lithuania's actions, calling the closures a crazy scam, and accusing the West of orchestrating a hybrid war to strangle Russia's access to its territory. Lithuania, on the other hand, argues that its actions are defensive and necessary. Officials point to ongoing provocations from Belarus and insist that they're not deliberately blocking Kaliningrad's lifeline, only tightening control over who and what crosses the border. Still, the timing of these restrictions, combined with the tense state of EU-Russia relations, means that the move has a deep political undertone. It signals that Europe is willing to use border control as leverage against Moscow. Kaliningrad's isolation has always been a vulnerability for Russia. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the region has been separated from the rest of Russia by two NATO members, Lithuania and Poland. Moscow's ability to maintain the exclave has depended on cooperation and transit rights negotiated with the EU. In 2022, when sanctions were first placed on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, Lithuania temporarily banned the transport of certain sanctioned goods to Kaliningrad. That crisis was diffused through EU mediation, but it exposed how fragile this lifeline really is. The latest disruption only reinforces that fragility. For ordinary people in Kaliningrad, this could soon mean shortages and rising prices. Many essentials arrive by train from mainland Russia, and with hundreds of freight cars now immobilized, local shelves could begin to empty. The region's leadership has tried to reassure residents that alternative routes by sea are operational, but delays and costs are inevitable. Meanwhile, Russian officials have accused Lithuania and its Western allies of trying to create an economic blockade. They've warned of serious consequences if the restrictions aren't lifted, though it's unclear what that response would look like. Economically, the disruption is significant. The cost of rerouting supplies through seaports can be up to 3 times higher than overland transport. Rail is efficient because of bulk capacity, but with that now crippled, Russia must depend more on maritime logistics. The Baltic Sea, however, is crowded with NATO naval activity, and insurance rates for Russian vessels are rising due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Even if Moscow manages to reroute most cargo by sea, it will face higher costs and slower delivery times. Politically, this situation places additional strain on the already tense relationship between Russia, Belarus, and the European Union. Belarus is Russia's closest ally, but its borders with the EU have become flashpoints. Lithuania's move to close crossing signals a broader effort by the EU to isolate Minsk for its role in supporting Moscow. This dynamic indirectly traps Kaliningrad in a geopolitical squeeze. It's not only about stopping smuggling or defending borders. It's part of a wider contest for influence and control in Eastern Europe. The military implications can't be ignored either. Kaliningrad is home to advanced weapon systems, including Iskander missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads. Any perceived threat to its supply lines is viewed by Moscow as a direct challenge to its sovereignty and military readiness. Analysts fear that Russia might respond with military pressure, such as increased naval patrols in the Baltic or joint drills with Belarus near Lithuania's border. Such moves would escalate tension in a region that's already seen an unprecedented buildup of NATO forces since 2022. At the same time, NATO countries are watching closely. The Suwałki Gap, the narrow stretch of land between Poland and Lithuania separating Kaliningrad from Belarus, is often described as the alliance's most vulnerable point. If Russia were ever to try connecting its territory through force, that corridor would become the focus of any confrontation. With the current transit crisis, the Suwałki Gap has once again entered military planning conversations on both sides. It's a reminder that logistics and geography often determine strategy. From a humanitarian standpoint, long delays and stranded cargo affect thousands of drivers, workers, and families. Images of parked freight trains and lines of trucks stretching for miles have circulated on social media. Drivers report waiting for days without clear instructions, and local economies near the crossings are feeling the strain. Temporary storage yards are filling up, and warehouses in Kaliningrad are struggling to manage incoming stock with no predictable schedule. Russia is trying to present a calm front publicly, but inside government circles, the alarm is clear. The Transport Ministry has called emergency meetings, and shipping companies are being instructed to increase their routes between St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad. New ferry lines are being planned, but these measures take time. Meanwhile, Belarus has pledged to help reroute cargo through its own infrastructure, but without Lithuania's cooperation, the bottleneck remains. In Moscow's media, the incident is framed as another example of Western hostility. Commentators argue that the West is deliberately cutting off Kaliningrad to provoke Russia. State TV segments have described Lithuania's actions as a blockade, comparing them to Cold War tactics. This rhetoric fuels domestic anger but also makes diplomatic solutions harder, since any compromise could be seen as weakness. From Lithuania's perspective, the message is different. Officials say they're defending their borders against hybrid threats, smuggling, migration manipulation, and information warfare from Belarus and Russia. They insist the closures are temporary and targeted, not meant to isolate Kaliningrad. However, Given how deeply interconnected transit routes are, even a partial closure can have massive ripple effects. If the crisis continues, we could see broader consequences. Russia might increase its use of the Baltic Sea for military and commercial logistics, making the region busier and more contested. The EU might tighten restrictions further if it sees Moscow escalating tensions. Belarus could deepen its dependency on Russia, losing even more autonomy in exchange for financial support. And Kaliningrad itself may grow more militarized as Moscow fortifies it against perceived isolation. The longer the land bridge remains broken, the more symbolic this becomes. It highlights Russia's isolation from Europe, not just politically but physically. The image of trains full of goods unable to move across friendly borders sends a message about how far relations have deteriorated. It also reminds the world that geography still matters. A few hundred kilometers of closed rail line can separate a global power from one of its key territories. Experts are warning that this could be the start of a new phase of logistical warfare. Instead of direct military clashes, countries are using borders, customs rules, and infrastructure choke points as tools of pressure. It's cheaper, less risky, but still highly effective. Russia, which once prided itself on self-sufficiency, is discovering that even it can be cornered by the loss of a few critical corridors. Kaliningrad's situation is now a case study in the geopolitics of dependence. Despite being armed to the teeth, its survival depends on the goodwill of its neighbors. Moscow's challenge will be to maintain that territory's viability without provoking a wider confrontation. The EU and Lithuania, meanwhile, must balance security concerns with the risk of triggering a dangerous escalation. In the coming weeks, all eyes will be on whether Lithuania allows more controlled transits to resume and whether Russia escalates in response. Satellite tracking of cargo vessels between St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad is already showing an uptick, which means Moscow is moving quickly to adapt. But long term, it's hard to see how this situation returns to normal without a political settlement. For the people of Kaliningrad, the hope is that the crisis doesn't turn into a blockade or trigger wider conflict. For Moscow, the challenge is preserving a lifeline to its westernmost outpost under increasing isolation. And for Europe, it's a delicate act of containment, holding the line without crossing into open confrontation. This story is still developing, and the consequences may unfold over months or even years. It's not just a matter of stranded trains, it's a reflection of how deeply divided the continent has become. As supply chains seize up and rhetoric hardens, the Kaliningrad land bridge crisis stands as another reminder that in modern geopolitics, every border crossing can become a battlefield. Thanks for watching, and if you found this analysis helpful, make sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more updates on global events, strategic developments, and political analysis. Stay informed, stay curious, and see you in the next one.